Now, the opposition leader, Peter Malinowski, says the Medi hotel program should be suspended in South Australia to minimise the risk, given the events of the last week. What's your response to that?
These are cheap but cruel stunts from an opposition at this time. Obviously, we still have many thousands of Australians desperately trying to return to Australia, hoping to get back by Christmas. Now, we've been processing about 6,000 of those per week. Let's remember that since the pandemic began and border restrictions were put in place, more than 400,000 people have returned to Australia, and overwhelmingly, these have been safe, well-managed processes. Of course, we've had to learn as we've gone along with an unprecedented pandemic, an unknown virus, as to how we definitely control things along the way, and we've put further safety mechanisms in place. We've had audits along the way to make sure that everything is done as safely as it can be. But at a time when we've had federal Labor out there calling on us to bring people back even faster, I find it amazing that we have a state Labor leader now calling us to stop bringing people back at all. And I would hope that Anthony Albanese, Penny Wong and others would dissociate themselves from Mr Malinowskis' remarks today.
You and the Prime Minister have said that international travel in 2021 might be off the cards, but we're hearing now vaccines with an efficacy rates of upwards of 90% could be rolled out within a month or so. Is international travel back on the cards for next year?
Kieran, it's not impossible, and I would like to think that we will see such success in terms of both the vaccines and their effectiveness, then of course the manufacturing rollout, distribution, uptake, all of the other factors that come into how it is that a vaccine could change the way we look at things around this pandemic. It's why our government has been world leading in terms of the types of contracts we've entered into for different vaccines, securing millions of potential doses for Australians to make sure that we are about as well placed as anybody possibly can be for our country, for our regional partners in terms of our care for our Pacific Island friends, and making sure that we've also driven a consistent line that any vaccine breakthroughs need to be shared across the world. This can't be technology that is held and profited upon. It's got to be something that enables everybody to respond quickly. So I'm hopeful.
But could you see Australians heading overseas in the first half of next year if they've been vaccinated?
I think the first half may be challenging, but let's just see how we go in terms of how quickly we can secure, distribute, get that take-up in relation to vaccines with the confidence and safety that everybody needs in terms of the vaccine itself being safe, and that's why all of the standards at present are so important, as well as, crucially, of course, then the vaccine being effective in ensuring that people aren't spreading COVID when they come back.
Can you understand why Gladys Berejiklian wants to open up, she's saying in the papers today, she wants to open up a third of her state's hotel quarantine slots to international students and skilled migrants as a boost to the economy. Are you sympathetic to that?
I can certainly understand. However, the priority has to remain on returning Australians. This is exactly what we've been talking about through this interview, that getting those Australians, particularly those who might be in challenging or distressed circumstances, home is a genuine priority, and we don't want to see them left stranded and isolated because of state Labor leaders wanting to simply stop arrivals altogether, or because places are unduly displaced in terms of going to other purposes. But if we can see fast enough movement in terms of the bringing down of that list of returning Australians, then I would like nothing more than to see international students able to safely come through proven processes as a key part of our services export industry and a crucial part of our university system.
Did the Premier in your state and the Chief Health Officer lose their nerve this past week, with their overreaction to a small cluster?
I think they sought to manage what they saw the risk being at the time and to act in ways that avoided any possibility of South Australia facing a Victorian-style 3-month or so lockdown, that their view was acting hard and swift for a few days was going to be far better than facing 112 days or, of course, the even worse circumstances that you see overseas. So I can understand the rationale, particularly given that they went from 1 case to 16 cases to 23 cases in the space of a couple of days, that they had some 5,000 plus people who are now in mandatory isolation as a result of the contact tracing activities, and that I think what they saw was that the contact tracing was going to reach a point of viability pressures, and that this instance that proved to be false, but this claim that COVID had been contracted again from another touch point off of a delivered pizza box was a tipping point for them in terms of the potential number of contact tracing elements that they needed to chase down. So, look, I of course would wish that the short but brief lockdown had never occurred. I wish even more that this guy had told the truth, whatever his motivations may be. But I do understand that a few days of intensive restrictions are certainly a damn sight better than a few months.
I want to ask you, well, no argument there. I want to ask you about some other stories. The list of 14 grievances from China issued in the last week, none were really a surprise. The PM says they go to our national interest. Are we in a stalemate now with China?
Kieran, it is very much a case, as I've said many times before, that the ball is in China's court. From the Australian government's perspective, we, like China or any other nation, will always stand up for our values and our interests and protect our sovereignty and security. But that doesn't mean that we aren't also open to dialogue, engagement and cooperation with our partner countries across the globe. And that is very much where we are at with China, that as a government, Australia is willing to continue in all of the areas of mutual benefit and engagement between Australia and China. We have emphasised and stressed that time and time again. Our cooperation, our economic partnership has been outstanding for each of our countries and for the region over the last couple of decades. It's lifted hundreds of millions of people out of poverty, created enormous new opportunities and growth across this region, and that is certainly why we think it is in China's best interests, Australia's best interests and the region's best interests at a time where economic recovery is so crucial for that cooperation to continue. And it's why we are so deeply concerned at the fact that the number of regulatory interventions China has taken this year that seem to have disrupted the flow of trade do then undermine that economic cooperation.
Why can some Asian nations, some with territorial disputes with China, much more, pertinent than, I guess, Australia in terms of how close they are to that massive country, but how do they maintain workable relations, yet ours has deteriorated so much?
Kieran, again, in many ways you're asking a question that is a question for Chinese authorities as to why they may have chosen to seemingly single out Australia in some way for commentary and or action in different ways. We believe that there are many grounds upon which our two countries have successfully cooperated, not only in terms of economic grounds. We've cooperated successfully in areas of security, and we've cooperated successfully in terms of areas of health cooperation, such as...
But the Treasurer this week tried to calm things down. The Treasurer tried to calm things down. He was slapped down, basically. It was rejected. So it doesn't look promising.
Well, I certainly don't think that a number of the actions from China's embassy in Australia have been particularly helpful this year. The comments of the ambassador at the start of the year that essentially were threats of coercion. These actions in terms of providing lists of documents of claimed grievances, even though they are the types of things that, as I say, any country rightly does in terms of providing for rules around foreign investment to make sure it's in the national interests, rules to protect critical infrastructure and security provisions in nations. That's something that China does as much as Australia does. And
the lack of face-to-face summits like APEC and East Asia Summit, those things that normally would give the Prime Minister a chance to have an aside chat with the President Xi Jinping, that's not afforded this year, is it? So that's unfortunate in a way that the Prime Minister is having these virtual summits at a time when he really needs to have a face-to-face discussion.
I think that's quite an appropriate observation, Kieran, that yes, COVID does certainly add a degree of difficulty in terms of working through some of these issues. I would normally, through all of these types of summits and plurilateral trade negotiations or multi-country trade negotiations, have a whole range of official and unofficial meetings on the margins with my counterparts, and the Foreign Minister and the Prime Minister would do exactly the same thing. And so it has been one of the extra challenges this year that informal dialogue, those seizing of the opportunities and moments have been much harder to come by, basically impossible to come by in some of these circumstances. So that certainly doesn't help. I'm not saying that it would fix the current circumstances, but it is yet another hindrance in terms of addressing them.
A couple of other issues before you go. Superannuation. The report released by the Treasurer is clear-cut, saying maintaining the superannuation guarantee at 9.5% would allow for higher living standards in working life. Working life income for most people would be around 2% higher in the long run. That's just one of its assertions, but it's basically saying that the rate should stay where it is. Now, the report is clear. Is the government spooked by the politics of this?
Kieran, the report is clear that there are trade-offs that exist between working life income and retirement income. That superannuation is a very important vehicle in terms of protecting people in their retirement years, and it certainly is, but so too are measures such as home ownership and, of course, the age pension remaining a crucial factor in supporting those who may not be able to save effectively for their retirement through either compulsory or voluntary vehicles of savings. So there are a range of different inputs to this. This report is an important one. So too is the analysis and observations of the Reserve Bank of Australia, the work of entities like the Grattan Institute, and the government's been clear that we will work through all of these issues in terms of any decisions that are to be made and respond appropriately next year.
And finally, before I'll let you go, the SAS, that story, the report, the Brereton report, so concerning, some of its findings. How damaging is that to our international reputation as someone who represents Australia in an official capacity? Are you worried about the damage in terms of our international reputation, the prestige of our military?
Look, it is a troubling report. It's troubling at many levels. It's troubling for the many thousands of Australian service personnel who have served our nation with nothing but distinction, and we ought to make sure that first of all we call them out for praise, for thanks, and for acknowledgement, because this should certainly not tarnish everyone. The vast majority have done us nothing but pride and good service. This, though, yes, does show a problem. What it also shows, though, is that Australia is a country that owns up to problems and that has a far higher level of transparency than perhaps many other nations of the world. And so, yes, it creates some challenges in terms of the instances that occurred, but I think we can also, in our international engagement, hold our head high that where these sorts of terrible, atrocious things have occurred, Australia doesn't shirk away from it. We go through proper processes, we make sure that we expose it, and we are transparent to the world about then how we are going about fixing it, and that transparency is something that not all others would apply the same standards to.
Minister, I appreciate it. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Kieran. My pleasure.